This semester, students in Dr. Alarcon's Introduction to Art History class laid out the plans of two Gothic cathedrals, Saint Denis and Amiens. The project was designed to get students out of the lecture hall and into the field, in this case SIU's Rhinella field, where they used simple tools to reconstruct the apses of two of the Gothic period's most influential structures. Learning about architecture from slides is the traditional approach, but this doesn't always allow students to get an idea of the scale and dimensions of buildings. In southern Illinois, there aren't any buildings around that replicate the grandeur and size of these enormous structures, so it can be hard for students to understand the impact that these buildings had when they were originally built.
This is the asp of St. Abbey of Saint Denis Cathedral, and we are working on building this today.
So after we do this big one, we can go back and copy this side onto that side.
Again, it's just kind of like thinking strategically, like how to keep replicating the measurements so that we can move out and start making.
This project required students to use basic geometry and mathematical ratios to lay out the plan onto the field. In the Middle Ages, these were the only tools available, and so our students, armed with a bit of string, some landscape pins, and a basic plan, were able to use this proportional system to dissect these structures. Medieval architects often used basic shapes like squares and circles in their architectural plans. The simplicity of these shapes belies their meaning, as they were also symbols of God's perfection on earth, and the ratios embedded in every medieval cathedral were physical demonstrations of Christian spirituality. European crusaders, as well as pilgrims, brought back ideas from the Islamic world in the Middle East, as well as closer to home in Spain. Muslim architecture, in particular, relied heavily on ratios to show the splendor of God's divine plan. Students learned how, in taking the hypotenuse of a simple square and using it as the side of another square, you would get a series of perfectly balanced rectangles. This harmonious balance in Islamic architecture can be found in Gothic cathedrals. It was a cross-cultural exchange that is not often mentioned when speaking of these European buildings. Students were able to experience these ratios firsthand as they dissected their plans and laid them out onto the field. The project had a variety of aims, but foremost among them was to get students to experience the structure of these buildings, as the architectural plans they worked with were the skeletal frameworks of two of the Gothic period's most important structures, the Abbey Church of Saint Denis in Paris and Amiens Cathedral. Saint Denis is the building that began the craze for light and height during the medieval period. Begun in 1140 and finished in 1144, Saint Denis was one of the first buildings that incorporated concepts such as ribbed vaults, prototypes of flying buttresses to open up the windows into heavy masonry walls and bring in light, or in the case of Saint Denis, colored light, in its many stained glass windows. Our students completed the apses of these two buildings. The apse is the semicircular space behind the altar at the eastern end of most Christian churches. Where Saint Denis is at the start of this architectural boom, Amiens is firmly at its center and is one of the largest Gothic cathedrals ever completed. Currently, the largest Gothic cathedral in France, Amiens is the jewel with radiating chapels in its apse, paired flying buttresses, and huge open windows. Students were first paired into two groups, either Team Saint Denis or Team Amiens. Working as a group with the help of their graduate teaching assistants, Walter and Marta, who did such an excellent job with these students, the students dissected their buildings, learning more about the geometric structure embedded in each plan. On the field, using either yellow tape for Amiens Cathedral or red tape for Saint Denis, they laid out their apses using landscape pins for each of the major points on their architectural plan. Circular radiuses were drawn by having one student stand in the center holding a piece of string and another holding tightly onto the other end as they walked in a circle. A very simple but very effective way of forming a perfect semicircle. Using these very basic but important ideas of geometry, students learn not only about Gothic cathedral, but also how to work effectively in a group, how to use abstract concepts learned in the classroom in real-world scenarios. Students can take this knowledge into their studies of other areas like graphic design, interior design, mathematics, engineering, or simply take these concepts that they practice in spatial reasoning from this project into their everyday lives.
I think it's a really, really fun project. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of math, but I really enjoyed learning more about it. I think it's kind of cool having to actually hurry up and race the other team and only use what you've learned. It kind of gives me a new aspect on our history. It's really cool, and it kind of makes me wonder how they did that